The house on Rideau Terrace smelled like beeswax and old ambition, and Harriet had learned, in 4 years of marriage, that neither one of them had anything to do with her. She had come to understand this slowly, the way you understand a winter that has lasted too long. Not in one moment of revelation, but in the accumulation of small things. The way Geoffrey set his teacup down without looking at her. The way he introduced her at dinner parties. My wife, Harriet. The way a man might say my coat, my ledger, my horse. Possession stated, interest concluded. It was March of 1887, and the Ottawa River was still frozen at the edges, and Harriet was 26 years old, and she had begun to believe that this was simply what a life looked like when it was lived correctly. She had been 22 when she married Geoffrey Ashford. Her father had arranged it over 3 weeks and 2 dinners at the Rideau Club, and Harriet had worn a white dress with seed pearls at the collar, and everyone had said she looked lovely, and she had smiled and believed that loveliness was enough to build a life on. It was not. Geoffrey was not cruel. That was what she told herself in the early years. On the nights she lay awake listening to him sleep on the other side of a mattress that might as well have been a county line. He was not cruel. He was simply absent. Present in body, in name, in the chair at the head of the table, but absent in every way that she had once believed mattered. He had never asked her what she thought about anything. Not the house, not the garden she had spent 2 summers coaxing into order, not the books she left on the parlor table with pages marked. He walked past them the way he walked past the furniture, as though she, too, were something that had simply always been there. She told herself it was enough that he was respectable. She told herself it was enough that the house was warm. She told herself these things in the particular quiet voice that women learn when they are trying very hard not to hear themselves. And then came the evening in March, with the wind off the river and the fire low in the study grate, and Harriet learned something she could not untell herself. She had not been listening at the door. She wanted to be clear about that, even to herself, years later. She had come down the back stairs to ask Miss Drummond about the morning's delivery, and she had passed the study, and the door was not fully closed, and Geoffrey's voice carried in the way it always did when he had been drinking brandy and feeling important. Sentimental is what she is, Geoffrey was saying. Plants flowers in November, reads poetry aloud to the cat. I sometimes wonder if I married a woman or a watercolor. The laughter that followed was not loud. That was somehow the worst of it. It was easy, comfortable laughter. The laughter of men who have had this conversation before and expect to have it again. There were 2 other voices. She recognized one as his solicitor, Pemberton, and the other as a man she had met only once, a cousin from Kingston whose name she had already forgotten. Does she know? The cousin asked. Know what? Geoffrey said. That she married a man who needs her to be less than she is in order to feel like more than he is. A pause. God, no. She thinks she's devoted. That's rather the point. Harriet stood in the hallway with her hand against the wallpaper. Pale yellow. She had chosen it herself. She had stood in the shop on Spark Street for an hour comparing samples, and she felt something move through her that was not quite anger and not quite grief. It was clarity. The kind that comes only once, and only when you have stopped arguing with what you already know. She did not go in. She did not knock. She walked back up the stairs to the bedroom they shared in the way that 2 strangers share a train compartment, by arrangement, without intimacy, and she sat on the edge of the bed and looked at her hands for a long time. On her left hand was a ring, gold, simple, given to her on a morning in June by a man who had looked at her the way he looked at contracts. With the mild satisfaction of business concluded, she looked at it for a long time. Then she took it off and placed it on the nightstand, and the small sound it made against the wood was the quietest possible end to something that had never really begun. She did not sleep, but she did not cry, either. She sat in the dark and she thought, and what she thought was this: I am 26 years old. I have been here 4 years. I do not have to stay. The thought was so simple that she almost didn't trust it. She had $9.40 in the small tin box she kept at the back of the wardrobe behind her winter boots. She had put it there over 18 months, a few coins at a time, from the household budget, in the way that women who have learned to be careful learn to be careful. She had not known, exactly, what she was saving for. She had told herself it was for emergencies. She understood now that this was the emergency. She spent the rest of the night making decisions with the particular calm that comes after the storm has already passed inside you. She would take what was hers: her grandmother's quilt, her books, the photographs of her mother, the good wool coat she had bought with her own dressmaking money 3 years before the wedding. She would not take the silver-backed hairbrush Geoffrey had given her at Christmas, because it had never felt like a gift. She would leave before Jeffrey came downstairs for breakfast. She would go to the station. She did not know yet where she was going. She would figure that out on the train. At 5:30 in the morning, with the sky still dark and the house still, Harriet carried her traveling bag down the back stairs and out through the kitchen door into the March cold. The snow crunched under her boots. She did not look back at the house. She had read enough stories to know that looking back changed things. The streets of Ottawa were empty at that hour, except for the milk wagons, and one old man shoveling his front walk who looked at her with mild curiosity and then looked away. She walked to the station. It took 40 minutes. Her bag was heavy, and her left hand felt strange without the ring, and the cold was the clean, honest kind that does not apologize for itself. At the station, she bought a ticket to Perth. She chose Perth because it was the first place she thought of that was far enough. 80 miles, a different world. She sat in the waiting room with her bag on her knees and her $9.40 in her coat pocket, and she breathed very deliberately until the train came. The woman who sat down beside her on the train was perhaps 60, with a sharp face softened by something that might have been experience or might have been amusement. Harriet couldn't tell which and later decided it was both. She wore a sensible gray coat and carried a basket covered with a cloth, and she arranged herself with the economy of someone who has been arranging herself in difficult situations for a very long time. Her name was Mrs. Strachan, and she said it the way Scotswomen say things, as information offered once, not requiring acknowledgement. Harriet said her own name and then looked back out the window. "You're going to Perth," Mrs. Strachan said. It was not quite a question. "Yes," Harriet said. "Family there?" "No." Mrs. Strachan considered this without apparent concern. "Work then." "I'm looking into possibilities," Harriet said carefully. Mrs. Strachan looked at the bag, and then at the left hand without the ring, and then back out the window, and said nothing more for a long while. When she did speak again, it was not about any of that. "My sister runs a household in Perth," she said. "Large house, needs help with the sewing and the books. She's been looking since October." She paused. "She's a reasonable woman, doesn't ask unnecessary questions." Harriet looked at her. "You can mention my name," Mrs. Strachan said. "Catherine Strachan. She'll know." Outside, the frozen fields were turning pale gold as the sun came up over the eastern pines. Harriet watched them go past and felt something she had not felt in so long she had almost forgotten its name. It was not happiness, not yet. It was possibility, which is the thing that comes before happiness and is in some ways more honest. "Thank you," she said. Mrs. Strachan nodded once. "Don't thank me yet. She'll work you hard." Harriet almost smiled. "I don't mind hard." Mrs. Strachan's sister was Mrs. Flora Reed, and she ran her household on Drummond Street with the efficiency of someone who has no patience for ornamentation but considerable patience for competence. She looked at Harriet for approximately 30 seconds when she arrived on her front step that cold March morning, took in the good coat and the traveling bag and the calm, careful face, and said, "Can you keep accounts?" "Yes," Harriet said. "Sew to a pattern?" "Yes." "Make yourself useful without being told twice?" "Yes." "Come in then," Mrs. Reed said. "I'll hear your name, and then I'll show you the room." The room was small, and faced the back garden, and had a window that let in the afternoon light. It was the most purely hers that any room had been in 4 years. She set her bag down on the narrow bed and stood in the silence for a moment and listened to it. It was not the silence of the house on Rideau Terrace, which had always felt like something withheld. This silence had a different texture. It felt like space, like a page not yet written on. She unpacked her grandmother's quilt and spread it on the bed. She set her books on the shelf. She arranged her mother's photographs on the windowsill. Then she sat in the small chair by the window and watched the winter light move across the garden and let herself believe, for the first time in a long time, that she might be all right. She was not all right immediately. There is a particular exhaustion that comes after you have been holding yourself together for a very long time and then stop. It arrived that first night and stayed for several weeks. A heaviness that was not sadness, exactly, but something more like the ache that follows when a clenched fist finally opens. She slept long hours. She was quiet at meals. Mrs. Reed did not press her for conversation, which was perhaps the kindest thing anyone had done for her in years. She worked hard as she had promised. She kept the household accounts with the precision she had taught herself during the years of managing Jeffrey's domestic budget, which had been considerable and poorly organized. She sorted linen and supervised the kitchen garden orders, and, on Tuesday and Thursday afternoons, taught the 2 younger Reed daughters their needlework, which they bore with varying degrees of patience. The elder Theodora was 12 and surprisingly earnest. The younger Bess was 9 and hopeless with a needle and frankly unrepentant about it. Harriet liked them both enormously. In the evenings, she sat by the window in her room and wrote letters. Not to Geoffrey. She had nothing to say to Geoffrey that needed to be said. Not to her father, who had arranged the marriage and who she suspected would find a way to make this her fault. She wrote to her mother's sister, her Aunt Edith, who lived in Guelph and had always been the one person in the family who said true things plainly. The first letter she wrote was 3 pages long and told almost nothing. The second was shorter and told more. By the third, she was telling the truth, and the truth was this. I left. I am in Perth. I am working in a good house and sleeping without dread for the first time in 4 years. I do not know what comes next. I think, for the moment, that is all right. Her Aunt Edith wrote back in 11 days. The letter was 2 paragraphs and said, with the economy of a woman who had always known exactly what she meant, I am glad you left. I have been afraid you wouldn't. Come to Guelph when you are ready. There is something I should have told you sooner. Harriet read that last sentence 4 times before she folded the letter and kept it under her pillow. Spring came the way it always comes to eastern Ontario, reluctantly, and then all at once. The ice on the Tay River went out in the first week of April, and Harriet walked to see it, standing on the bridge with her coat open, and her face up to the thin new sun, and thought about nothing at all, which was its own kind of luxury. It was on one of these walks that she met Dr. Evelyn Marsh. Dr. Marsh was not the sort of person you failed to notice. She was 43, tall, carried herself like someone who had spent years not asking permission for her height, and wore her dark hair in a way that suggested she had made a firm decision about it once, and not revisited the matter. She was also, as Harriet would learn over the following weeks, the only woman physician in Perth County, a fact that people mentioned with varying tones, some with admiration, some with the particular discomfort of those who have decided that admiration is not the appropriate response, but cannot quite land on what is. She was coming out of the pharmacy on Gore Street when she nearly walked into Harriet on the front step. I beg your pardon, Dr. Marsh said, and then looked at her with the frank, assessing gaze of someone who has trained themselves to see people clearly. You're Mrs. Reed's new help. I am, Harriet said. Harriet Croft. She had decided to use her maiden name. It had felt, when she made the decision, like putting on a coat that fit. Evelyn Marsh, the doctor said, and shook her hand without the small hesitation that most women of that class and period inserted before a handshake, as though physical directness required an apology. Are you settling in? Better than expected, Harriet said honestly. Good. Dr. Marsh paused. Come to tea on Thursday if you like. I have a small Thursday gathering, women who read things and say what they think about them. Flora Reed comes occasionally, when she can be persuaded. You might find it useful. It was not quite an invitation and not quite a prescription. It had the quality of something Harriet had been needing without knowing she'd been needing it. Thank you, she said. I'll come. The Thursday gathering met in Dr. Marsh's front parlor, which contained more books than furniture and a general atmosphere of productive disorder. There were 6 women that first evening, ranging in age from Harriet's 26 to a woman named Agnes, who was at least 70 and had opinions about everything, and the confidence of someone who has outlasted most of the people who ever told her she was wrong. They read a passage from a collection of essays. She no longer remembered which one, and then they talked, and the thing that struck Harriet was not what they said, but how they said it. Directly, without the small decorative apologies she had learned to insert before every opinion in 4 years of marriage, without looking to see whether someone's face had changed before continuing. She said something that evening, something small, a point about the essay's argument, and Dr. Marsh said, yes, exactly, and the woman beside her nodded, and nothing more than that happened, and yet Harriet felt the back of her throat tighten in the way it does when you have been in the dark for a long time and someone opens a door. She went home and sat in her room for a long while before she could sleep. It was in June that the letter came from Geoffrey. She had been expecting it, in the abstract way you expect a bill to arrive. Not with dread, exactly, but with the acknowledgement that it is coming and will need to be dealt with. It had taken him 3 months to write, which told her things about him she already knew. The letter was 4 paragraphs. The first stated that her absence had caused him considerable inconvenience. The second suggested that she had acted in haste and without proper consideration of what was owed to him and to the household. The third, and this was the paragraph she read twice, slowly, contained the information that he had spoken to her father, and that her father was of the view that she should return, that whatever difficulty had caused her to act as she did could no doubt be resolved, and that a woman of her position had obligations that superseded personal feeling. The fourth paragraph said that he remained, as ever, her devoted husband. She set the letter down on the windowsill and looked at it for a moment. Then she picked up her pen and wrote back one paragraph. Dear Geoffrey, I am well. I will not be returning. I wish you no particular ill, and I ask nothing from you in return except that you allow me the same. The ring is on the nightstand. You will find the household accounts in the third drawer of the study desk, organized by quarter. Yours, Harriet Croft. She signed it with her maiden name. She sealed it before she could think about it further. She walked to the post office and on the way home she stopped at the bakery on Foster Street and bought herself a small currant cake, because it seemed like an occasion. It was in July that she went to Guelph to see Aunt Edith. Her Aunt Edith lived in a yellow clapboard house on the edge of town, and grew tomatoes and held opinions, and was, at 64, one of the most competent people Harriet had ever known. She met Harriet at the door with a look that was partly assessment, and partly relief, and entirely love, and did not make her explain anything before she had been fed. Over dinner, Aunt Edith told her what she had needed to tell her sooner. Her mother, dead now 12 years, had left something, not much, a small parcel of land 12 acres outside Elora, left to her by her own mother, which had passed to Harriet on her mother's death. Her father had known about it and had not told her, and when she asked why, Aunt Edith's face did the thing it did when she was controlling her expression, and simply said that her father had expected she would be provided for through marriage, and had seen no reason to complicate matters. 12 acres that were hers, had been hers for 12 years, and she had not known. She sat with this for a long time that evening. The land was rented at present, Aunt Edith said. A family had been farming it since her mother's death, paying an annual rent that had been going all these years to an account in her father's name that she had never seen. She thought about Geoffrey in the study, laughing. She thought about her father, arranging her life like furniture. She thought about all the rooms she had been in where the decisions were made before she walked through the door. I want to see it, she said. I thought you might, Aunt Edith said. I've written to the family. They're expecting us Friday. The land was outside Elora, on the slope above the Grand River, and she saw it for the first time on a Friday morning in July, with the sun coming through the maples and the river visible below through the trees. It was not dramatic land. It was not the kind of thing you would paint, but it was solid and particular and real in the way that only things that are truly yours can be. And when she stood in the upper field and put her hand against the bark of an old maple at the fence line, something moved through her that was not sentiment and not ownership exactly, but something more complicated than both. It was the particular emotion of a woman who has finally walked into a room and found that her name is on the deed. The family farming the land were the Buchanans, an older couple, careful and weathered, who met them at the edge of the property with the slight wariness of people who have learned to be cautious about change. They shook hands and walked her through what they had done with the land and what it was capable of, and she listened carefully and asked questions. And at one point, the husband, Mr. Buchanan, looked at her with mild surprise at something she said, and she recognized the look, the slight recalibration that happens when a man realizes that the woman he expected to smile and nod is, in fact, paying attention. She arranged to speak with a solicitor in Guelph the following week. She would need to sort out the account, and the legal standing, and what could be done with the property going forward. She would need, also, to have a conversation with her father that she was not looking forward to. But she had learned, in these months, that the things you are not looking forward to are frequently the things that need most to be done. She was not a woman who had planned any of this. She had not set out from the house on Rideau Terrace with a strategy. She had set out with $9.40 and the certainty that she could not stay. That was all. And yet here she was, standing in a field that was hers, with a solicitor's appointment and a room above a garden and a Thursday circle of women who said true things plainly, and a life that was, for the first time, organized around what she needed, rather than what she was supposed to provide. She stayed in Guelph for 10 days. When she returned to Perth, she wrote 3 letters. The first was to the solicitor, confirming their arrangement. The second was to Mrs. Reed, who had been generous in allowing her the absence, and who deserved to know that Harriet intended to stay on through the autumn, if the offer remained open. The third was harder to write, and she wrote several drafts before she found the right version. It was to her father. She did not write it in anger, though anger would have been reasonable. She wrote it with the careful precision of someone who has decided that the conversation is necessary, and that clarity is kinder than warmth when warmth is not available. She told him she knew about the land. She told him she intended to manage it herself. She told him she did not require his assistance, his counsel, or his opinion on her choices. She told him she hoped, in time, they could arrive at something that resembled a peace, if not a warmth. She told him she would visit at Christmas if he wished it, and if he did not, she would understand. She did not ask him to respond. She sealed it and sent it, and then sat in the evening light of her room, with her grandmother's quilt around her shoulders, and the last of the summer through the window, and felt for the first time since she was very young, entirely like herself. Dr. Marsh had said something at Thursday Circle the week before, in the middle of a conversation about something else entirely, that Harriet had carried with her since. The hardest thing, she had said, setting down her teacup with the blunt decisiveness she brought to everything, is not leaving the wrong life. The hardest thing is learning to trust that the right one is being built, even when you cannot yet see the shape of it. Harriet had thought about it on the train back from Guelph, watching the fields go past in the evening gold. She thought about it now, in the room that was hers, with the photographs of her mother on the sill and the books on the shelf, and the accounts she was keeping in the clean ledger she had bought herself in Perth Market. She was 26 years old. She had $9.40 when she left. She had, it turned out, 12 acres she did not know about, and a room with light, and women who listened when she spoke, and the particular confidence that comes not from knowing the future, but from having survived the present. She opened the ledger to a fresh page. At the top she wrote the date, July the 14th, 1887. Below it, in the careful hand she had always had, she wrote, what I know, what I have, what I will do next. And then she wrote it all down, every word of it, in her own hand, in her own book, on her own time.